Hello, all you positive heads out there. It's so good to be back with all you beautiful reflections of the one source consciousness that creates and animates all things. If you're new to this podcast, of course, we're super happy to have you here. And if you've been listening and enjoying for a while, I would be super grateful if you would please take a moment to give us a review on Apple Podcasts. It's one of the best and simplest ways to pay it forward and help others find the show so that they too can tap into the powerful perspectives and positive vibrations we are collectively emanating. The other unique and magical way to share this show is by sending any friends you think would benefit from listening to this podcast our Game with the Universe link at positivehead.com/game. Also listed in the show notes, which will serve them up a quote unquote random episode when they click it. Just instruct them before clicking the link to close their eyes for a moment and sincerely ask the universe to cue up the episode that contains the insight and perspectives that they most need to hear at this point in their life journey, and then click to listen to whatever episode is synchronistically served up to them. I have heard time and time again from people about the incredible results they received playing the game. So just tell your friends magical results are guaranteed or their karma back. All right, all you positive heads, on this week's Soul Share episode, we have something very special in store for you. I have Neale Donald Walsch, who played a huge role for me personally, and I'm sure many of you in remembering that we are all one with the source consciousness that creates and animates all things. And in case you don't know, Neale is the author of the acclaimed Conversations with God book series, which spent years on the New York Times Bestseller list, as well as the author of 30 other books that have been translated into 37 languages and reach millions of souls all around the globe. Hello, Neale. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you, Brandon. It's lovely to be here. How may I serve you?
Well, you showed up, so we're off to a good start. You have definitely been on the top of my list of someone I wanted to speak to for many years. Huge role in my own journey, and this podcast. So thank you for the work that you've done. And I would like to start with my cliche opening question. It is this. You're in an elevator. The woman next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" You have 10 floors to answer. What do you say?
Change the word. Change the world's mind about God. Change the world's mind about God. That's 7 words.
We've got 9 floors left, and she can ponder that, depending how fast the elevator is. I definitely can say that you have done a good job at doing that, and let's get into that. Before we do, I would like, if you would, share, for those who haven't read any of your books and don't know your backstory, whatever feels relevant to share, to give some context, if you would.
Sure. Somewhere in 1994 or late 1993, I can't recall the exact month, but my relationship with my then spouse, a lovely, lovely lady, who I will always adore, but we decided we needed to bring our marriage to a conclusion. I was very sad about that, but I agreed to move out and find my own place. It was not an acrimonious separation, but we just decided to do it. Mm-hmm. But 5 days later, I was downsized out of a job. I thought I was doing a good job here. And my supervisor said, no, we love your work. Actually, you're really good at what you do. But you were the last in, you're just a recent hire. And so we had to cut staff. We have to downsize, and last in, first out, matter of seniorities. We have to let you go.
Right.
So now within 5 days, I'm losing my marriage and losing my job. But that wasn't enough. Brandon. The world wasn't finished with me. 4 days after that, within the same 9-day period, an elderly gentleman turned in front of me in his car, made a left turn across my lane as I was ambling down the road. And I'm a very, very slow driver. Everyone who knows me complains, in fact, my gosh, what a slow poke. But I'm poking along 25 miles an hour. But this guy, I guess he thought he could make the turn. And he turned right in front of me and smashed into my car, caused a huge accident. He amazingly escaped injury, but I did not.
Wow.
I suffered a broken neck and not a hairline fracture. I recall the wording of the report specifically. It said that I had suffered a 3/4 inch avulsion fracture of the 7th cervical vertebrae posteriorly. That is a 3/4 inch break in the back of my neck, large enough to put a pencil through.
Wow.
So, of course, they rushed me to the hospital, and I was treated and I was sent home. The doctor did say to me when I woke up, he said, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? He said, because you should, by all other factors, you shouldn't be here. Most people who suffer a broken neck either die instantly or at the very least, they're paralyzed from the neck down, especially with a 3/4 inch fracture of your neck. He said, you amazingly escaped both outcomes. You may want to consider what you want to do for the rest of your life.
Wow.
So I went back to my little apartment, which I had just managed to get. A friend of mine had a little apartment over a garage that he was his grandmother's, what they call a grandma place. And he threw me in there as a place to, at least be for a while. I was looking for a more permanent lodging after the end of my marriage. And I'm lying in this garage top apartment and after having suffered, and I'm wearing a Philadelphia collar, by the way. They put me in naturally a Philadelphia collar, which is a therapeutic device that you wear. I had to wear it for a year and a half. I was not allowed to take it off for showers or for sleeping for any reason.
Year and a half?
Yeah, I had to wear it for over, something like 13 or 14 months anyway. It was over a year.
Wow.
That I was required to wear it before my neck would refuse. They had to fuse it again because they did not want to put in artificial cartilage. So your neck will heal. Your broken bones will heal themselves if you give them long enough time. But now I'm lying in my apartment wearing this contraption around my neck, and I woke up at 4:30 in the morning one day, and I couldn't sleep. Went out to my little tiny living area away from the bedroom, picked up a yellow legal pad that I happened to have down there for a grocery list, and I began writing a very, very angry letter to God. What does it take to make life work? I can recall sitting there writing, what have I done to deserve a life of such continuing struggle? And then the last question I asked, I was writing so hard, pressing so hard on this legal pad, you probably could have read the writing 6 pages deep for the impression I was making.
Right.
I said, what are the rules? I'll play. I said, I'll play the game. Just tell me what the damn rules are.
Right.
Because I clearly did not understand the rules of this process called life. And that's when I began hearing answers. I could have sworn there was someone over my shoulder in the room. Of course, there wasn't. But the impression of the voice was so clear that it felt physical to me, but of course, it was in my mind. And the answer I received was, Neale, do you really want answers to all of these questions? Or are you just venting? I can recall sitting there on the couch. It's 4:30 in the morning. I'm saying, yeah. Do you think I am venting? Yeah. But if you've got answers, I'd sure as hell like to know what they are.
Wow.
I didn't even know who I was talking to, but I thought I was, just answer this voice in my head. So if you've got answers, I'd sure as hell like to know what they are. And God said, wouldn't you rather be sure as heaven? And I said, what's that supposed to mean? And then I began having this, if you please, dialogue with this voice in my mind. And I kept on asking questions. It kept on answering the questions. So I was in this experience of question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. I was writing down all the answers I was receiving, taking dictation, really. It was very much like taking dictation because I was so fascinated about what was happening. I didn't want to lose what I want to use the word receiving. So I wrote in longhand every answer I received. This went on for a couple of hours. And then I ran out of yellow legal pad space. I ran to the drugstore the next day or later that day. I think it was a Saturday, as I recall. Ran to the drugstore, picked up 4 or 5 more legal pads, brought them home, and continued the dialogue, which ultimately became what turned into Conversations with God, Book 1. Now, I've been asked many times, why did you send it to a publisher? What would cause you to send your handwritten notes to a publisher? I was told in the dialogue, Brandon, this you will make of this one day a book, and it will be read by many people. It will be accessed, were the exact words. It will be accessed by many people.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, yeah, of course. Sure.
Yeah.
I can just see a publisher. I would just send these notes, even if I typed them out, I would send them to a publisher and he would say to his, to his editorial staff, hold the presses. Stop everything.
New Bible.
I got a guy here who's talking to God.
Yeah.
But I knew it wasn't going to happen. There wasn't a chance in the world.
Wow.
But in fact, a small publisher, I sent it to 5 publishing houses, a small publisher on the East Coast, Hampton Roads Publishing, did call me. And they said, we'd like to put your book out. I said, you're kidding me. They said, no, we love it. We'd like to change the title. No one's going to believe it. Conversation with God, but it's a great work of fiction. I said, whoa. You're not publishing this as a novel, are you? He said, yeah, about a guy who goes off and has a exchange with the Lord. I said, no. This actually happened to me.
Yeah.
You either put it out as a work of fact, not fiction, but as a nonfiction book, or you don't publish it at all. He said, let me see if I understand. You're going to turn down a publishing contract for your first book because we don't have it in the right category? I said, that's correct.
Yeah.
That is correct, because it's not a work.
Wouldn't have been authentic.
Fiction.
Yeah.
And I will not have anyone think that it's fictional.
Yeah.
He said, okay, well, we're going to have to change the title because people are going to be pushed back by the title.
Yeah.
Conversations with God. I said, no, we're not changing the title either. You either publish it as titled Conversations with God, or you don't publish it at all. He said, wow, for a never published author, first time guy, you're kind of hard. I said, you know what? You called me.
I'm good friends with God, so,
I said, you called, notice who called who. You called me. He said, yeah, but you sent us the material. I said, fair enough. Do you want to publish it as a nonfiction book called Conversations with God, or don't you? This is a really very simple conversation. And he kind of sighed and said, well, okay, but it's not going to have a lot of sales. And he was right, of course. It didn't have a lot of sales. The initial sales were only 5 million.
That's all. Oh.
Or more like 1 million. It grew to 5 million at the end of the year.
Yeah.
In 37 languages. So, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
So I'm curious, here you are, you've been through a very rough patch, to say the least, and you start hearing this voice in your head. Had you ever had any sort of channeling experience or voices in your head or any of that sort of, experience prior to this?
No.
Yeah. Wow. Did it shock you? It didn't shock you, scare you? I mean, it seems like you went right into...
I was a little frightened at first because some of the things I was hearing violated everything I had ever been told by anyone, really, my religion, the religion of my youth, or anybody in my adult life about God and about life. For instance, as an example, one of the earliest comments I heard was, there's no such thing as the 10 Commandments. And I thought, oh my gosh,
here we go.
There's no such thing as right and wrong. There are no victims and no villains in the universe, and all these other messages I was receiving. And I thought, oh man, am I trafficking with the devil here? What's going on? What is this? So I began to worry about what in fact was happening. But as I allowed the experience to continue, I became convinced that I had done what everyone is in the world is doing. They're simply calling it something else. Because God said to me, Neale, this is not about you. I talk to everyone all the time.
Mm-hmm.
The question is not to whom am I talking? The question is who's listening.
Right.
But people call it something else. Women's intuition, a sudden insight, an epiphany, whatever they think they can get away with without having to explain, a moment of inspiration, whatever they want to call it. Because if they said, God told me this, they know that they'd be marginalized and ridiculed. So nobody says that, which is exactly why the publisher didn't want to put the book out by that title. He thought it would be ridiculed and laughed at, and it would sell like 25 copies. But in fact, it managed to reach more people than he expected.
Yeah. Pleasant surprise on his end, I'm sure. And it is bold, and thank God that you stuck by, keeping it the title, the nonfiction, etc. Because obviously it would have been a very different impact if it was sort of sent out there as a fiction, a work of fiction. So let's talk a little bit about your latest book, The God Solution. And you in this book, you invite, there's an invitation for people to embrace a new global ethic based on a refined and clarified definition of God. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thank you for asking. I should explain to anyone who's listening to this that this latest book, The God Solution, is not a dialogue book. I don't want them to think it's a question and answer dialogue books. There are 9 conversations with God dialogue books, but this is not one of them. I consider this book to be the apotheosis of the entire Conversations with God body of work. And because it encapsulates all of the major messages, the most important messages, what I consider to be the critically important messages of the Conversations with God dialogues. And I put it all into one book, and I called the book The God Solution because I believe that it is the solution to the world's human-made problems. Not to our natural disasters, hurricanes, tidal waves, being hit by a meteor, that kind of stuff, but to the problems that we are creating for ourselves, being created by ourselves. The human-made challenges and problems that we're creating could be solved if we simply took the advice that's offered in the God Solution. And you're correct in summarizing that point. The point I made in the book is that everything would be solved if we simply chose to redefine God. Mm-hmm. If we chose to define God in 2 words, pure love. Mm-hmm. And if we decided to move forward in our human interactions with that understanding that God can be defined with the words pure love, we would find many of the challenges and problems, the energetics and the emotional conflicts that exist between us as humans, melting away. But now I usually have, at this point, when I offer this point of view in a live presentation, in a live lecture, someone inevitably says, "Oh, Neale, come on. I've been listening to you now for 15 minutes, and for you to tell me that you think the big idea is that God is love." Everyone understands that God is love. I mean, all the world's religions may disagree on a lot of other doctrines, but no one disagrees about the fact that God is love. And now I have to say, wait, hold it. Relax. I didn't say God is love. It's not what you heard me say. All right, what did you say? I said God is pure love. All right, what's the difference? And I would say the difference is that pure love needs nothing in return.
Right.
Asks for nothing and demands nothing in return. So that you're loving someone purely when you have no self-interest in the sending of that energy. You're not loving someone because, you're in a tit-for-tat quid pro quo relationship. I'll give you this, you give me that.
Right.
You're loving someone simply because you do, needing nothing and requiring nothing, asking nothing,
Not
even
transactional.
hoping for nothing in return, for the simple reason that you need nothing to come back to you in exchange for the love that you're giving. Now, if we decided that that was the ethic of God, if we decided God was pure love, it would change our interactions with each other, because most of the world's people believe in a divine being. Recent surveys have shown, by the way, sociologists have taken a one-question survey around the world in the past 5 years. They went to almost every nation asking people, do you believe in a divine power? Do you believe in a higher power? And 8 out of 10 people said yes. They couldn't define it. They couldn't describe it particularly, but 8 out of 10 people said, yeah, we believe there is some kind of higher power. That is, there's more going on here. To use my words, there's more going on here than meets the eye. So there is a higher power. Now, when you have 8 out of 10 people believing that there is a God, what they believe about God starts to become fairly critical. Because if we believe about God that God is judgmental, condemning, and punishing, we will allow ourselves to be judgmental, condemning, and punishing with others, because after all, every religion in the world invites us to model God, to behave with each other the way God behaves with us.
Right.
So our attitude as human beings is, if it's good enough for God, it's good enough for me. So we interact with each other, nation with nation, people with people, races with races, genders with genders, age group with age group, economic groups with economic groups. We interact with each other from a place of judgment, condemnation, and punishment. That is, if you don't give me what I need to receive from you in this quid pro quo relationship, then I will judge, condemn, and punish you. Because after all, that's what God does with us.
Yeah.
But now if we change our mind that God doesn't do that, God judges no one, condemns no one, and punishes no one for anything, that is theologically revolutionary, and sociologically revolutionary as well, because it would pull out from under us, pull the rug out from under us, our rationale for behaving with each other the way we are.
Yeah. Before we continue on with today's episode, for those of you interested in getting more fantastic fungi in your life, I want to take a quick moment to tell you about a friend of mine's brand new company, The Great Mother. Recently, I have been drinking The Great Mother's superfood mushroom coffee alternative called Ritual, as well as regularly taking their awesome Ally microdoses, and I am truly loving both. As you probably know, these days, many of the world's highest achievers and performers swear by microdosing. The problem is it can still be difficult to get a hold of magic mushrooms. That's why when my friend reached out, who lives in an area and country where legalization is not a problem like it was in the past, and said he'd be willing to offer microdoses to my listeners, I wanted to pass the word along. Ally microdoses are 100% organic. And in addition to a small amount of the magic active ingredient, they also contain functional mushrooms like lion's mane, cordyceps, chaga, and other brain boosters like bacopa. Ally is essentially a full spectrum nootropic. And of course, the coffee alternative Ritual doesn't contain magic mushrooms, but it has an array of the best organic functional mushrooms in the world. And, with functional mushrooms, it's really important to get them from the highest integrity sources. And whereas some other highly popular mushroom coffee alternatives on the market only contain a few varieties of functional mushrooms in their actual ingredients, Ritual has 7. Not only does it contain more types, it also contains 3 to 4 times the amount that the big brands have in each serving. And it tastes amazing. I actually like to have it on its own, as well as mixing it into my coffee sometimes as well. However, since this is definitely a unique offering, there are a few steps. First, just reach out and request to follow the private page, thegreat.mother on Instagram. Once you've been accepted to follow, just message what you're interested in getting and someone will get back to you. You know, what I think of when you talk about this is my favorite book that you've written. Um, I'm going to let you take a guess. What do you think? If you had to guess, what do you think my very favorite Neale Donald Walsch book is?
What God Wants.
The Little Soul and the Sun.
Ah,
And I believe that I
it's a
always say
children's book.
that is for children from 9 to 99, I believe. And I just love it. I mean, listeners, I'm sure many listeners, they've heard me talk about the book before. They knew the answer because it's so concise, obviously, as a children's book. And it just, I believe it shares the story of, it's the essence of what's going on. All of our judgment, our level of ignorance, I believe, is equivalent to the degree to which we judge. And that book shares sort of this, this account of the soul that loves us so much, it's willing to do the thing, the awful thing to us so that we can have the experience of forgiveness, right? And it's like when you put it in that context, in that framework, that, hold on, you mean all of these awful things are, are blessings in disguise, are a gift, in that the soul that actually, did the awful thing had to go through a lot of pain to get into a state where it was even capable of doing something awful. It really changes the perspective. I mean, I've read the book many times over the years to friends, at a gathering or whatever, and people cry. It's like, because it really like puts it in such an incredible light. We of course think of the things that happen to us. I mean, I think of a betrayal in my own life that led to, a story of redemption and now even deeper friendship. And it's, I believe that message can really help us with this whole judgment thing.
I couldn't agree with you more. And you're not the first person to say those kinds of words to me about that children's book, The Little Soul and the Sun. So yes, I agree with you that it is a profound message and presented so simply that really even a 9-year-old child could understand it.
Exactly. Wow. It's really, it's something, as I hear you talking about it. And of course, the high percentage of people believe there is a higher power. Do you ever think that the word God may just be too charged of a word to be salvaged? Like we need to try and redefine, consciousness, the universe, higher self, the source, all these other sort of terms. I mean, does that ever cross your mind? Like, we can't save this word. People have too many ingrained ideas.
No, I think it's easier to change ideas about something as simple as God than it is to try to explain consciousness and higher awareness or oblique terminologies that were born in psychological profiles or whatever.
Right.
So I don't think that. I think that people are more willing, if they're able to find a good reason to, more willing to change their mind about spiritual and theological constructions than they are willing to change their mind about psychological constructions. So when I talk to people, which I don't very often, but when I hear other people talking to large groups about raising consciousness, everybody crosses their eyes. What the hell does that mean? How does that work?
Right.
Or expanding our awareness and so forth. But when I talk to them about God, at least they know what I'm talking about. They might disagree with who and what God is, but at least they know I'm talking about some kind of higher creative force that exists in the universe.
They don't have to understand quantum physics.
Precisely. So I have found that the word God is serviceable, and I think that people, and judging by the 15 million people who have read Conversations with God and found out about the new definition of God, people are not having a difficult time. They're feeling it as a breath of fresh air. Most people who read my book, not all, but most of them come away from it saying, "Oh, thank God. Somebody put it out there in a simple way. Here it is. Here's, I can't tell you how many letters and emails and messages I've received through the years from people saying, at last, somebody has put it out there in simple, direct terms that make sense to both the mind and the soul.
Right. Right. And it's like it's talked about in the books, this is something that, you know, it's in all of us too. It's this remembering, as opposed to even educating something that we don't know, right? Deep down within each of us is this wisdom. And, these books, of course, have done such an incredible job of like helping millions to
I was told in the dialogue, Brandon, that life is not a school. She said to me, sweetheart, life is not a school. I know everyone's telling you that life is a school and there are lessons you have come here to learn. No. And I said, wow, you're right. I've been told that since I was 7 years old, when I was enrolled in a parochial school. And life is a school, and you have to learn the lessons you have to learn. And there's no escaping the lessons, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. God said, Neale, is there a tree outside your window? I said, yeah. She said, how tall is the tree? I said, I don't know, it's 25, 28, 30 feet tall. It's a pretty big oak tree out my window. God said, what has the tree learned since it was a seed no bigger than your little fingernail? I said, well, it hasn't learned anything. It just grew into itself. God said, are you telling me that in the seed was implanted all the data that the tree needed to know to grow into that magnificent oak outside your window? I said, yes. God said, so it's your thought that I love the tree more than I love you? Or would I not do the same for you?
Right.
So here's what I want you to know. Everything that you need to understand, to do what you came here to do, to, if you please, grow into your true self, your highest self, like the tree is doing out your window. Everything you needed to know was programmed into you. If I so loved the tree, would I not all the more love you? So life is not a process of learning anything. It's a process of remembering what you have always known deep in your heart. And you don't have to remember how to be who you really are when the chips are down. Many people discover that when they encounter such moments. In the most critical moments of your life, when everything is on the line, many people find themselves suddenly acting instinctively, not to survive, but to demonstrate the highest thought they ever had within themselves about who they are and why they're here. I think of a man in New York City a few years ago. The story was in the New York Times, made all the news outlets, who jumped off the subway platform because a child, about a 5-year-old child, had tripped and fallen off the platform and found himself on the tracks as the subway was coming. Everybody was screaming, "Oh my God, the subway's coming, the subway's coming." They could hear the subway down the tracks. This guy jumps off the platform, throws himself on top of the child to cover the child in the crevice between the two rails of the tracks. And sure enough, just as he got himself over that child, the subway comes roaring through.
Wow.
And it stopped. And they pulled the man out. The child survived. The man amazingly survived with no major injuries, a few scrapes on his back, really.
Wow.
From the lowest part of the subway. And the media was all over the guy. They had the television cameras and the newspaper reporters were there. You're a hero. You're a hero. He said, no, I'm not a hero. I did what anybody would do. And he did. In conversations with God, I was given the illustration of a burning building moment. Supposing you're walking down the street and you look to the left, oh my God, the building's on fire. And does anybody see there's flames coming out of the windows of that building? And then hear a lady calling from the second story, help, save my baby, at least save my baby, help, I can't get my baby out of here. Now, 9 people out of 10 would run into that building to save that baby and that mother. They wouldn't sit there and think, gee, am I going to live another 20 years or another 20 minutes? They don't weigh the discussion. They don't weigh the outcome. They simply do what their impulse is guiding them to do, which is rush in and save that baby and that mother. So what God said to me was, Neale, if you really want to know who you really are, consider every moment a burning building moment. Because guess what? The house is on fire. In case you haven't noticed.
Yeah. I was wondering what that smell was. Yeah, wow. Very, very true that, when push comes to shove a lot of times, I mean, even in the greatest catastrophes and things, that's when we see the best of people, right? It's like people come together.
That's my point precisely.
I'm curious, in all your conversations with God, the 9 books and then beyond, and there's so much insight there. Is there any, and I almost wonder, maybe you don't even have a favorite insight, probably not. But when I ask that question, what is the first insight that comes to mind that you think would be the most, that was an aha moment for you when you received it, that sharing it now could have the greatest ROI, ripple of impact to the listeners?
Well, the first one, I've been asked that question before, and the first one is that stopped me in my tracks was when God told me, Neale, your life is not about you. It's about everyone whose life you touch and the way in which you touch it.
Yeah.
Now, if you don't think that'll change your life, then you just didn't hear the words.
Yeah.
Or you didn't believe them. But if you believed those words that you heard, it would change your life overnight.
Right.
I've had 2 or 3 other insights that made an impact on me. I was asked by Matt Lauer on the Today Show a few years ago. He said, Neale, okay, he turned to the camera. They had a short interview of me. I wasn't on for long, but they had me on for like 6 or 7 minutes toward the end of one of their programs on the Today Show. And Matt Lauer said to me, well, ladies and gentlemen, Neale Donald Walsch claims he's had a conversation with God. Mr. Walsch, if you really did have a conversation with God, what's God's message to the world? He said, if you could put it in one paragraph, it would be helpful because we have about 30 seconds. I said, you would ask me the most important question of the interview with 30 seconds left, Matt. But in fact, I can give you the answer, not in one paragraph, in 5 words. And Matt Lauer turned to the camera. I'll always remember the moment. Turned to his NBC camera and he said, all right, ladies and gentlemen, Neale Donald Walsch with God's message to the world in 5 words. Neale? And I said, God's message to the world in 5 words is this. You've got me all wrong.
Oh, good answer.
And Matt had nowhere to go with it. Matt Lauer was tongue-tied, speechless. He had nowhere to go. I said, Matt, either that message is correct or it's not correct. Either way, this discussion is over.
Right. Oh, I love that answer. It's not what I expected either.
The other message that I said, there were 2 or 3 that come up for me. Another message that stopped me in my tracks was, what you resist persists.
I've used that one many times from you.
And the last one that I remember is, in the absence of what you are not, what you are is not. That explained to me the law of opposites and helped me understand why the opposite of what I'm trying to experience will arise in my awareness, and that I do not benefit from seeking to feel negative about that, to have a negative response.
Right.
But that if I use the tool of gratitude and welcome the opposite into my life, I will then place myself in a perfect position to experience and to create who I really am and what I really wish to experience.
That one is profound. How many people are shaking their fist, we at that which we don't want, not realizing, the higher the branches, the deeper the roots. It's a necessary balancing act.
It is. We have to have a contextual field, Brandon, to be able to experience what we want to experience. When I'm lecturing to people, I'll use a simple example, which everyone gets instantly. I say to them, supposing, let's just for the sake of discussion, let's just say metaphorically that what you want is to be the light. And you wouldn't be, by the way, the first person to say on the planet, I am the light, because you genuinely want to be that source which brings the light to life as we're experiencing it. So supposing you say, I am the light, I want to be the light. But supposing you're like a candle in the sun, surrounded by nothing else but light, how can you be the light?
Right.
So you will, in fact, call forth what you are not, which is the darkness, in order that you might express, experience, and demonstrate what you are, which is the light.
Right.
Therefore, judge not, and neither condemn, but be a light unto the darkness, that you might know who you really are.
Whew. Powerful. And what I think of with that whole train of thought, the brighter the light, the larger the shadow it casts, in a sense, right? If you have a really bright light, the shadow from that light is going to be bigger than, a tiny little candle. So as your light expands, the shadow is sort of mirroring, in a sense, right?
Yes. When we understand the law of opposites, we understand a great deal about life, and we shift our energy from anger to gratitude.
That really, I believe, is the turning point. Once that sort of leads to that life is happening for me, not to me, perspective, which it doesn't mean we're going to love it. It doesn't mean what's happening is what we would have consciously chosen, but we trust it. And we're looking for the silver lining in the experience, right?
We can even not have to trust it. I like to say that trust is not necessary to the soul which understands that the outcome is inevitable. Every change is change for the better. Nothing can occur in our life that does not lead to the next step in our evolutionary process, which is precisely why it's happening. When we understand that, we can greet those unwelcome events with a certain placid attitude that allows us to simply embrace it, say, okay, it's all good. It's not welcome. It's not what I would have chosen, to use your words, but I can deal with this. Thank you, God, for helping me to understand that this problem has already been solved for me, which happens to be, by the way, my favorite prayer.
Yeah.
Thank you, God, for helping me to understand that this problem has already been solved for me.
Yeah, profound to navigate from that perspective. Yeah. So thinking back on, it's been a while since reading Conversations with God books, and I remember the one that maybe it was the third in the series, thinking back, where you talked a lot about the other side of the veil and sort of how things are structured. And, I think as I'm asking you the question, I'm thinking, what is one of the more shocking things when, reflecting back on the message that you received from God? And it was like this idea that our loved ones are there when we cross over, that, even the ones we left behind, because, time, of course, is illusory and there is no time there, so everyone would be there. I'd love to just hear you talk a little bit about some of those things that you were, shown and explained in that book.
The book you're referring to is called Home with God.
Yes.
In a Life That Never Ends.
Yes.
And that book offered me some wonderful revelations about what we call life after death, not the least of which is that death itself does not exist,
Mm-hmm.
that no one ever dies, but that we simply change our identity. We simply claim a new identity. Or to use a word that's become popular in the past 25 years, we transition.
Mm-hmm.
And or what I call in my wording, we celebrate our continuation day.
Yeah.
And we continue living, we simply drop, in a sense, to use a metaphor, we drop the body. But that which we are, the soul of us, the very essence of us, does not and cannot possibly cease to exist. So it exists in what I want to loosely call the realm of the spiritual, as opposed to the realm of the physical. And that it exists in the realm of the spiritual as part of its continuing, endless, ongoing process of evolution, becoming the next largest version of the greatest idea it ever had about itself. That the purpose of life is to evolve, and everything that we see in life is evolving, whether it's the flower in the garden or the planet in our telescope. Everything is evolving. The solar system, the galaxy, the entire universe is evolving, as is the garden in our backyard. Everything is becoming the next version of itself.
Yeah.
And what we think of as dying is not really dying, but simply transforming the way in which we express the life that resides within us, that can never die and never stop. So we never cease to be.
Mm.
One of the most shocking statements I heard in Home with God, in A Life That Never Ends, was the statement, no one dies at a time or in a way that is not of their choosing.
Right.
So I've, since reading that extraordinary book, I have never mourned the death of another, even a close loved one.
Mm.
I have mourned my loss,
Sure.
but not their death, because I know that they continue to exist. And they simply exist in a realm to which I currently do not have access, because my mind stops me from having access. My mind tells me that I'm making it all up. It's not really real. I'm imagining things, and I should better stop thinking that way, or they're going to put me on the 9th floor of the hospital.
Right.
So my mind gets in the way. And so in order for me to, and I've had people say to me when I talk to them, well, what, are you out of your mind? I say, yeah, actually, I am out of my mind. And that's what I need to do. I need to stay out of my mind so that I can come from my soul's understanding and my soul's awareness.
Would you agree that this ever evolving process that we're involved in, um, a part of that, a big part of that as human beings, and especially ones that are sort of at the stage in their evolution where they're really remembering a lot of this and resonating with a lot of these incredible insights, is opening up the channel so that more of our higher self, more of God can sort of integrate with our physical vessel. You know what I mean? So I guess in a sense, there's like these relative truths, like you talk about, you and I are separate. That's true. You and I are one. That's true, depending on the vantage point from which we are speaking. Right. And so with our higher self, there's some level of separation. And as we integrate more with the true nature of ourselves, it's like, I think instantly you're probably familiar. I don't know if you're familiar with Richard Rudd, wrote The Gene Keys by any chance?
No, I have not. I have not read any of his work.
No, very beautiful, kind of profound, um, you know, divination modality, looking at your genetic potential. And, I think of sort of my supposed life's work there. It's like, it talks about, it's all about using words and, the ultimate expression of it. You have the shadow side of it, which is arrogance, the the gift, which is leadership, and the city, the ultimate expression, humility. And it's like where you become sort of almost like an indifferent voice box for the divine. So it's like it's just like you're a vessel, and you're unattached to whether someone evolves or doesn't evolve, or and some. I guess this is my very long-winded question of, do you think that is the evolutionary process that we're all involved in, where it's like more and more of the divine is flowing through us, and less of our human self is sort of steering the ship?
I don't think that more and more of the divine is flowing through us, but I think that we are aware, more and more
Right.
aware of
Mhm.
the totality of the divine that's flowing through us.
Mhm.
So when we think of more and more of the divine is flowing through us, it's kind of like there's a valve somewhere, and God is turning, the valve on and flowing more of the divine through us. No, all of that which the divine is always flowing through us.
Mhm.
It's in fact who we are. We are individuations of divinity. But I would agree with you if you would accept an amendment to your wording that
Mhm.
would say we are having increasingly levels of awareness of the totality of divinity that is always flowing through us. And that's a process that we call evolution. I think that
Mhm.
sentient beings in the cosmos, here and elsewhere in the universe, move through a process through which they become more consciously aware. Talk about the consciousness movement. That's what it's really all about. Consciousness is another word for the awareness of our true identity,
Yeah.
the awareness of who we are, and the direct experience of the energetic that flows through us that we can project back out into the universe, that demonstrates our true identity,
Mm.
that causes a person to run into the burning building.
Mm-hmm.
So when we encounter a burning building moment, and make every important moment in our life a burning building moment, that is a moment when we refuse to deny our truest impulse to respond with the unconditional, pure love of God. When we engage that particular dynamic, we do, in fact, place into physical reality the truth of our being.
Yeah. Well said.
People who do that on a regular basis are called avatars or masters, spiritual masters, or gurus, or whatever word they want to use to describe. And there have been people, not just one or two, but many people who have taken that information and brought it into physical day-to-day reality.
Yeah.
And there are others that I know who are very close to achieving mastery. I'm not sure I would call them spiritual masters, but by golly, from my observation, they're getting doggone close. People like
Yeah.
Eckhart Tolle, who I've
Mm-hmm.
had occasion to spend time with, people
Mm-hmm.
like Byron Katie, others who I could name. I don't need to go through a list of people, but
Mm-hmm.
people whose behaviors tell me, boy, if they haven't mastered this, they're very close to
Yeah.
mastering.
Yeah.
That's why Byron Katie's wonderful book, Loving What is a masterpiece.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I do think that we're engaged in a process in which all sentient beings are expanding in their awareness of the ever-present fullness of divinity that is always flowing through us and through us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You also talked, I believe, in the same book where you talked about and gave like the analogy of like or metaphor of a apple and us going through the apple and the different like that. I really remember as being such a shocking, profound revelation as well for me years back when reading. And so, could you speak a little bit to that process that I'm referring to?
Well, yeah, I simply was given an analogy, here we go again, a metaphor of a worm tunneling its way through the apple. Then
Mm-hmm.
it gets but in this particular case, it gets to the core of the apple, and then it comes out on the other side of the core, expecting to move through the second half of the apple, only to find that the second half is an orange,
Yeah.
not an apple at all,
Right.
but an entirely different, if you please, piece of fruit, an entirely different experience. So I've called this the applorange, APPORLANGE, the applorange, the apple orange. And it's just a metaphor to help us understand that we're going through what we might call loosely the time tunnel. But then when we get to the core or the end of our time in this particular incarnation, then we go through a door that we often call death's door. And we go through death's door, but we discover that we haven't died at all. That we simply come out on the other side into a brand new experience that we metaphorically call the orange.
You're born into the orange, right?
Which is sweeter than the apple. As sweet as the apple was, it's even sweeter than the apple. And juicier as well. It's where the real juice is in the orange. So now we go through the orange and we come out on the other side of the orange, and then we travel on the surface around the outside of it, go back around to the beginning, and come back in the apple, which we call another incarnation.
Right.
Or we may decide to turn around inside the orange and go back through death's door, through the door that we call birth. I was told in Home with God that birth and death are precisely the same thing. We're simply moving from one phase of our life into another phase. We're moving from the physical phase into the spiritual phase, or back from the spiritual back into the physical. But that we are, one or the other. And we are doing this in order for us to offer ourselves continued opportunity to express and to experience who we really are. Because absent the contextual field that we find in the realm of the physical, we can't experience, as I explained before, we can't experience who we really are.
Yeah.
This was brought home to me, by the way, in a small way, but a little old lady told me this about 7 or 8 years ago. She was standing outside in front of a coffee shop that I visit regularly, and she's always there. She must be in her late 70s with a little cup in her hand, standing outside the coffee shop. And people are dropping coins in as they go by because they understand she's begging for money. But one day, I was in my cynical mood. This is before I changed my mind about who I want to be. But, I got out of my car and walked over there. Well, there she is again. It's kind of embarrassing. So I reached into my pocket. I didn't have any coins in my pocket, as it turned out. But I did have a couple of pieces of paper money. And the smallest bill I had was a $5 bill. I thought, well, whatever. So I put the $5 bill in her cup, but not without some sense of, I don't want to say resentment, but I did want to, say something to her about it. So I said, why are you always here every day? Just go out and get a job or do something. You ought to be some way that you shouldn't have to stand here and every day of your life beg people to put money in your cup. Why are you here every day? And she said, if I wasn't here, who would give you a chance today to decide who you are?
Oof. Oof. Oof.
And I stopped in my tracks.
Wow.
I looked at her and I said, whoa. I never looked at it that way.
Yeah.
But I'm looking at it that way now, and this is who I am. I reached into my pocket and took all of the folding money I had in my pocket, which would probably at that point amount to about $50. I had a couple of 20s or whatever, 10 in there. I just, not trying to make a show of it. It was just between her and me. Nobody else would ever know. So I wasn't bragging about it, but I just shoved it into the cup and I said, you know what? Thank you. Thank you for waking me out. I've been sleepwalking here. No wonder I'm going into the coffee shop. I need a cup of coffee badly. I've been sleepwalking. And she joined me in the laughter and joined me in the celebration.
Wow. That's so profound. It reminds me of a story I'd love to share. It's a short one. COVID, I I live in Venice Beach, Los Angeles area. A lot of people experiencing homelessness. Me and my partner are going to have a meal. At this time, everyone would sit outside on the sidewalks. And as I'm driving to go to this restaurant, we pass by a man who is, he's his gait. It's like a zombie. I mean, it's not like I don't see a lot of homelessness. It's just like it was so exaggerated and like frightening the way he was walking down the street. And I just fell into that moment with my partner of, wow, look at that. Wow, that's just rough. Like his energy, that walk, the everything. And, Neale, we pass by a few blocks later, we get down to the restaurant. We're sitting out on the patio. 10 minutes goes by. All of a sudden,
here's this guy.
I look to my right. He's 5 feet from me, staring me dead in the eyes. I look at him. He looks at me, and he goes, clear as a bell, his face. He's like, how you doing? And I'm like, just kind of surprised, I'm doing great. How are you? And he's like, oh, I'm doing just fine. And then he winked at me, kept on going. He was wearing a jacket, like pretty much the same jacket I was wearing too. And I'm like, wow, that was just, this judgment, right? It's so easy to fall into, why don't you, what's wrong with you? What's going on here? As if God doesn't know what it's doing, right?
Yeah.
Whew. Well, you just gave us a great story. And as we wind down here, I would love to hear from you if you have any more fun stories up your sleeve. Listeners know I love to ask for a story of synchronicity or serendipity, positive paranormal story. I think you know that too. Knew that question was coming. So wondering if you have pondered this whole episode on something to share.
I don't have a paranormal story so much, but I do have a story, an illustrative story of how all the events of our life can be used to advance the agenda of the soul, which I consider to be evolution. It's my parking ticket story, and I've told it elsewhere in lectures and so forth, so people may have heard it, but I don't think I've ever shared it with you, because this is my first time
I don't know it.
On your program. But I was coming out of that same coffee shop with my dad, coming out of a coffee shop in downtown where I live, in this small little town I live in Oregon. And there was a policeman putting a ticket on my car. He was just tucking it under the windshield wiper because apparently the parking meter had run out, and he was giving me a ticket for having stayed in my parking space past the time on the meter. So, I looked at him and I said, officer, could I talk to you a minute? And I'm sure he thought I was going to give him a ration for putting the ticket on he said, yeah, what do you got?
Hit me.
I said, well, I just wanted to tell you something. It's not lost on me that when you put that silver piece of metal on your chest in the morning and pin it to your shirt, you're making an implicit promise that you will stand between danger and me, whatever the danger might be, even if you think it might cost you your life. And I want you to know that I so get and appreciate who you are. This has got to be more than just a job to you. You've got to be clear about that when you put that piece of metal on your chest in the morning. And I guarantee you that your partner, when you leave the house, is very clear about it, hoping that you'll come back home that night. So I want you to know that I deeply appreciate who you are and what you do to make me feel safe on this street where I'm standing now. He reached under the windshield wiper and pulled out the ticket. He started to tear it up. He made the gesture. I said, no, no, don't you dare. No. This is not a tit for tat. This is not a quid pro quo. I didn't say that to get you to tear up my parking ticket. You did that also as part of your job. and I appreciate you doing whatever the law invites and requires you to do. Please put the ticket back. I don't want you to think for a minute that I said that gratuitously to get you to tear up my ticket.
Yeah.
I said that to you because I meant it.
Yeah.
And he put the ticket back under the windshield wiper, walked over to me, and he said, you know what? I've been on this force for 27 years. And no one has ever said anything close to that.
Wow.
To me. You've just made not my day. You've just made my whole career.
Wow.
He turned around and he walked away. I know he didn't want me to see the little welling of water just under his eye. He didn't want me to see a grown man in a uniform starting to get watery-eyed or maybe even cry a few tears, but he walked away from me. And that was an experience of giving people back to themselves. And when I am asked, what is the assignment I've been given by God? Because I believe I have been given an assignment. I believe we are all given the same assignment. Change the world's mind about God. Give people back to themselves. Awaken the species. And so I see if there's anything I can do in any given moment. I don't always achieve it. I don't always do it. I don't want to pretend that I'm this guy who's walking on water, but at least I have an idea what my intention is.
Yeah.
To give people back to themselves. To offer them whatever energy, words, or a hug, or a smile, or whatever it might be, that can cause them to remember the grandest aspect of who they really are. So that's maybe not the kind of story you were looking for.
I love that story. Because it's such a great example of just getting a little creative with your perspective and opening your heart, like you have to do for that even to occur to you, as opposed to aggravation or what have you. And then the ripple of impact of this, something like that coming authentically, like it did. And so I get so in the pleasure that you get in the moment, right, as well. And it's like this is the game. How do we open our hearts, get a little more creative, see things, as opposed to seeing things like checkers, more like chess, the bigger picture. And I really love that story. So thank you for sharing it.
You're very welcome, and thank you for having me on your program.
It's been such an honor and a pleasure. And for those who want to connect with you, what is the best, website? I know you also have your online
Just go to
group.
cwgconnect.com.
Yep. cwgconnect.com. We'll put it in the show notes.
And CWG, of course, stands for Conversations with God. So anyone who wants to connect with that energy, just go to cwgconnect.com and they'll find me there.
Excellent. I have one final question for you, and it is this. In 60 seconds or less, what is the meaning of life, according to Neale Donald Walsch?
Not according to Neale Donald Walsch, because I have nothing to offer that anyone else would have to offer as well. But according to what I've understood from the God of my understanding. So I'm not here to bring messages from Neale to the world. Oh, no one's going to put me in that position. according to Conversations with God, the meaning of life, the purpose of life, is to provide us with a continuing opportunity through eternity to announce and declare, express and fulfill, become and experience who we really are. So that the purpose of life is for us to have an experience of ourselves, of our true selves. And if we look into each of the most important moments of our life, we will see that they offer us that opportunity. And we will see that in some of those moments, we actually achieved that. All of us have had moments in our life when we've said, wow, now that's who I really am. And all of us have had moments when we said, whoa, I don't know what I was thinking. How did I come up with that response? But I think the meaning of life is that we are offered an opportunity continually through all eternity to demonstrate our true identity.
Hmm. Yeah. Well said. I've been asking that question for many years. You're the first one to proxy God to answer, and how appropriate to end it coming from you. And I can't even give you, any slack for taking longer than 60 seconds, because it was beautiful and well said, my friend. Thank you, Neale, for joining. And yeah, all of you for tuning in, your beautiful brainwaves and incredible hearts. Till next time, journey well.